Laura thought she knew her husband David, but his secret love affair with a man named Michael shattered the life she believed was real. Fueled by betrayal and consumed by rage, Laura and her girlfriend Rachel planned a crime so shocking that it would end in blood, dismemberment, and a chilling twist no one saw coming. Laura and David had been married for nearly a decade, and to the people around them, their life seemed nothing short of ideal. They lived in a tidy suburban house on a quiet street, where neighbors exchanged polite greetings, and the couple was often seen working in their garden or attending small community gatherings. Their marriage projected stability, the kind of relationship many people admired from a distance. Yet, inside their home, the atmosphere was far from warm. Laura had begun to feel the weight of a growing distance, a silent gap that widened with every passing month. David's attention was elsewhere, his affection slowly evaporating until what remained between them was little more than routine. At first, Laura explained it away with simple excuses. Perhaps it was work stress, she told herself. David's job often kept him late at the office, and the fatigue seemed to follow him home. But as time went on, his behavior became more difficult to ignore. His phone was always locked and tucked out of sight. Late-night messages made him smile faintly before he turned his back on her in bed. Weekends that once held shared plans now dissolved into excuses, trips he said were for business or friends she never met. Every detail that might have been harmless on its own began to knit together into a picture of betrayal. Laura found herself pacing their living room at night, her thoughts racing. She replayed conversations, scrutinized every small lie she thought she had missed. She felt like an outsider in her own marriage, as though someone else had taken her place in her husband's heart. Yet she still clung to fragments of hope, unwilling to accept the possibility that David was truly unfaithful. The human instinct to deny what hurts most kept her from facing the truth directly. But her body betrayed her mind. Her hands shook when she touched his laundry and found traces of cologne that wasn't his. Her stomach knotted when unfamiliar names flashed across his phone screen. The suspicion began to consume her, twisting into a kind of obsession. She needed answers, but fear of the truth made her hesitate. In quiet moments, she wondered if the problem was her own doing, if perhaps she had failed as a wife. But the evidence of his distance felt undeniable, and every day the weight pressed down harder. Behind the mask of a picture-perfect marriage, Laura's world was slowly unraveling, and she had no idea that what she was about to uncover would not only shatter her heart but drag her into something far darker than she could ever imagine. Laura's search for the truth began quietly, almost cautiously. As if she feared that confirming her suspicions would make them impossible to escape, she started by paying closer attention to David's patterns: what time he left the house, how long he stayed out, and the excuses he used when returning late. Each detail seemed ordinary when viewed alone, but together, they created a pattern that no longer felt random. She found herself scrolling through his credit card statements, noticing charges at restaurants she had never visited, and purchases that didn't fit his usual habits. What unsettled her most were recurring entries linked to the same places, often at hours when David had claimed to be working overtime. Her unease turned to shock when she decided to follow him one evening. She parked her car at a distance, her heart racing as she watched him walk into a dimly lit cafe. Laura expected to see another woman, someone who looked like the kind of threat she had imagined in her restless nights. But when David sat across from a man, the reality struck her with a force she had not prepared for. His face lit up in a way she had not seen in years. Their closeness, the subtle touches, the way David leaned in with comfort and familiarity, it was all unmistakable. This was not a casual friendship. This was intimacy, love even. The man's name, she later learned, was Michael. He was charismatic, confident, and lived a life entirely separate from hers. Discovering his identity did not bring closure, it deepened the wound. Laura felt not only betrayed as a wife but humiliated, as though David had been living a second life in plain sight. What unsettled her further was realizing how deeply the two men seemed connected. Michael wasn't a fling. He was a part of David's hidden world. In the midst of her turmoil, Laura found herself turning more often to Rachel. What had begun as a friendship had slowly become something far more personal. Rachel listened when Laura poured out her doubts, comforted her when she felt the sting of betrayal, and filled the void David had left behind. Their bond grew physical, adding another layer of secrecy to Laura's already fragile existence. When she confessed to Rachel what she had discovered about David and Michael, the atmosphere shifted. The betrayal no longer belonged to Laura alone, it became something they shared. But while Laura trembled under the weight of confusion, Rachel's eyes seemed to sharpen with something else, something far more dangerous than sympathy. Rachel became the anchor Laura leaned on, yet beneath the comfort, there was an undercurrent of something darker. Laura's pain fed Rachel's determination, and slowly, their conversations shifted from sympathy to anger. Rachel insisted that Michael was the root of everything: David's distance, Laura's misery, and the collapse of a marriage that had once seemed secure. If Michael were gone, Rachel argued, the pieces of Laura's life could fall back into place. To Laura, these words were at first a release of frustration, an outlet for the rage she could not otherwise express. But to Rachel, they were seeds planted with intent. The bond between the two women grew intense. Their secret relationship deepened, creating a world where only they understood each other's desires and fears. Rachel whispered ideas of justice, painting Michael as an invader who had stolen something sacred. She encouraged Laura to view him not just as a rival, but as an enemy who had deliberately destroyed her marriage. The anger that had once been scattered now had a target. Laura found herself imagining Michael's face at night, her fury boiling as she pictured David's happiness with him. Those images poisoned her thoughts until resentment turned into something far more dangerous. Together, they began following Michael. At first, it was simple curiosity, watching him leave work, seeing where he spent his evenings. But soon, it became routine. They learned his habits, the time he returned home, the bars he liked, and even the stores he frequented. The more they watched, the more they convinced themselves that they were justified. In their eyes, Michael wasn't an innocent man. He was an intruder who had broken apart their lives. Rachel's influence was strong, and Laura, drowning in betrayal, clung to it. As weeks passed, the fantasy of revenge turned into detailed planning. They discussed how easy it would be to confront him, how no one would ever expect them to be involved. Laura felt both terrified and liberated, as though crossing this line would finally give her back some control. Rachel, however, showed no hesitation. She treated the plan like a solution, something inevitable. And in that shared secrecy, Laura's doubts began to fade. What started as suspicion had evolved into surveillance, and surveillance had grown into a plan soaked with violent intent. Laura no longer saw herself as the betrayed wife, but as someone preparing to reclaim what had been stolen from her. She could not know then that she was stepping into a trap, not just for Michael, but for herself. The night unfolded under the cover of heavy clouds, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow the streets whole. Laura drove in silence, the windshield wipers beating a nervous rhythm against the glass. Her chest felt tight, each breath shallow, as though her body already knew what was about to happen. Beside her, Rachel exuded a calm that felt unnatural. She leaned back in her seat, her eyes fixed forward, her voice steady whenever she reminded Laura that this was necessary. The plan had grown from whispers into action, and there was no longer any space to turn back. Michael's apartment building was quiet when they arrived. The street lamps flickered weakly, casting distorted shadows across the pavement. They parked in an alley where no one would see them, and for a moment, Laura's body refused to move. Her legs felt like stone, her mind screaming for her to leave. But Rachel's hand on her arm urged her forward. Together, they walked quickly through the rain, their clothes already damp by the time they reached his door. The confrontation happened in a rush. Michael, surprised by the sudden intrusion, barely had time to react. Laura's fear and fury burst to the surface in a chaotic wave. Every ounce of anger she had bottled up came pouring out, and though her movements were clumsy, Rachel's were precise. Within minutes, the fight was over, and Michael lay motionless. The silence that followed was unbearable. Laura's body shook as she stared at the scene before her, her mind trying to reject the reality of what had just taken place. Rachel's voice cut through the haze, cold and deliberate. There was no time for hesitation. They had to finish what they started. Laura felt numb as Rachel retrieved the tools they had brought, and what followed was something Laura would never forget. The process was brutal, each moment more horrific than the last. The sound of tearing, the weight of what they were handling, the smell that clung to their skin, it all etched itself into Laura's memory. She wanted to stop, to run, but Rachel's control over her was suffocating. When the bags were finally sealed, they carried them out into the night. The rain masked their movements, washing faint traces of blood from their clothes as they loaded the car. They drove in silence, disposing of the bags in secluded places chosen days earlier. By the time they returned home, the women had left Michael scattered across the city. Laura washed her hands over and over, but the stains felt permanent, a reminder of the line she had crossed. She was no longer just a betrayed wife. She was part of something monstrous, forever tied to Rachel by the secret they now shared. In the days that followed, Laura tried to convince herself that life could return to normal. She woke each morning with the hope that the horror of that night had been nothing more than a nightmare. Yet every ordinary sound, the knock of the mailman, the buzz of her phone, the creak of the front door sent waves of panic through her. She avoided David's gaze, fearing he would somehow see the blood still on her hands, though her skin was clean. Rachel, on the other hand, seemed unaffected. She went about her days with an unsettling calm, reassuring Laura that they had been careful, that nothing would link them to Michael's disappearance. But calm could not erase the gnawing dread that grew inside Laura with each passing hour. It wasn't long before Michael's absence drew attention. His coworkers reported him missing when he failed to show up for several days, and his friends flooded social media with pleas for information. Investigators quickly stepped in, retracing his last known movements. Laura watched the news with a sickening weight in her chest, her heart racing. Every time a reporter said his name, she noticed how Rachel never flinched, never looked away. Instead, Rachel almost seemed satisfied, as though the world was finally acknowledging a problem she believed she had solved. The illusion of safety began to crack when detectives uncovered security footage. Laura's car, parked just a street away from Michael's apartment on the night he vanished, appeared in grainy detail. Soon after, hikers stumbled upon something horrific along a riverbank, a torn bag containing human remains. The investigation shifted swiftly, and the quiet neighborhood where Laura lived became a focus of suspicion. When the knock finally came, Laura's body gave out. Both women were taken into custody, and what followed was a flood of evidence that unraveled their careful fraud. Yet the most shocking revelation came not from the investigators but from Rachel herself. During questioning, she confessed in chilling detail, not only about the crime, but about her true motive. It had never been about helping Laura reclaim her husband or punishing Michael for betrayal. Rachel admitted she had been driven by jealousy. She wanted Laura entirely to herself, and Michael's existence stood in her way. Eliminating him was not about loyalty. It was about possession. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Laura had imagined. She realized she had been manipulated, her grief and anger twisted into tools for Rachel's obsession. The trial ended with both women convicted, their names forever tied to a crime so brutal it left the community in shock. What began as the story of a fractured marriage ended as a chilling reminder of how love, jealousy, and revenge can fuse into something monstrous.